They say love finds you when you least expect it. But what about when you've stopped expecting it altogether? When your hands are worn from decades of work, your heart scarred from years of pretending, and society tells you it's too late? Margaret was 67, cleaning houses and living a half-life. Rosa was 71, carrying the weight of sacrifice and silence. On an ordinary Thursday morning, their eyes met across a stranger's kitchen and everything changed. This is their story, a story of love that refused to die, even after a lifetime of being buried, because love has no expiration date. Margaret's knees complained as she knelt to scrub Mrs. Chun's kitchen floor. 67 years of cleaning other people's homes had left permanent grooves in her body, the ache in her lower back, the stiffness in her fingers each morning, the way her right shoulder clicked when she reached too high. She'd stopped noticing her reflection years ago. What was the point? "Margaret, I have someone I want you to meet." Mrs. Chun appeared in the doorway with another woman. Margaret looked up from the floor, still on her knees, and time stuttered. The woman was older than Margaret, maybe 70. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her clothes simple and clean but worn at the edges. But her eyes dark, deep. Carrying stories that could fill oceans, those eyes stopped Margaret's breath. "This is Rosa. She be helping me now that my daughter moved to Seattle." Rosa extended her hand to help Margaret up. When their fingers touched, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Seen. "Hello," Rosa said softly, her accent painting the word with warmth. El Salvador, Margaret would learn later. A whole life left behind. They worked in different rooms that first day, but Margaret was aware of Rosa's presence in every moment. The soft sound of her humming while dusting, the careful way she arranged Mrs. Chun's photographs back exactly as they'd been, the sigh she let out when she thought no one was listening. During their break, they sat on opposite ends of Mrs. Chun's couch, drinking coffee in silence. Margaret noticed Rosa's hands trembling slightly as she lifted the cup. "Arthritis," Rosa explained, catching Margaret's glance. 20 years working in a factory before this." "My knees are shot," Margaret offered. "But we keep going, right?" Rosa's smile was sad and knowing. We keep going. Something in that moment, and the shared understanding of bodies broken by labor, of lives lived in service to others, of quiet endurance, created a crack in the walls both women had built around themselves. "How long have you been cleaning houses?" Rosa asked. 43 years. Started when my youngest went to school." Margaret paused. "Needed to help with bills. My husband worked construction, but it was never quite enough." "You have children?" 3, all grown now, scattered across the country. Margaret's voice carried the weight of distance, not just geographical. "You? 2 daughters?" "1 son." Rosa's eyes clouded. "My son doesn't speak to me anymore. Not for 5 years now." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions, with recognitions neither was ready to voice. But something had begun. 2 women, weathered by life, sitting on borrowed furniture in someone else's home, acknowledging each other's existence. It was a small beginning. But the most profound transformations often are. Spring turned to summer through a series of Thursdays. Margaret found herself thinking about Rosa between their shared shifts at Mrs. Chun's apartment. She caught herself wondering what Rosa did on her other days. Where she lived, if she was alone, they began arriving early, both claiming they wanted to get a head start, though really they wanted those extra 15 minutes of coffee and conversation before. Mrs. Chun woke up. Rosa talked about San Salvador, about leaving her country with nothing but 2 suitcases and 3 children, about working night shifts at a chicken processing plant for 15 years, her hands frozen and bleeding, about a marriage that had been more a survival partnership than love. "Miguel was a good father," Rosa said one morning, "but I was never myself with him. You understand? I was the person he needed me to be, the person our church needed me to be, the person our community expected. Margaret understood more than Rosa knew. Her own marriage had been similar, comfortable, functional, but built on a foundation of half-truths. She'd loved David in the way you love someone who shares your life but not your soul. When he died 6 years ago, she'd mourned him. But she'd also felt something she was ashamed to admit: relief. I was married 35 years, Margaret said quietly. Everyone said David was a good man, and he was. But Rosa, I spent those 35 years pretending to be someone I wasn't. Rosa's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. Their eyes met, and in that gaze was a lifetime of recognition. Who are you pretending to be? Rosa asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Someone who fit. Someone acceptable. Someone who loved men the way she was supposed to. The words hung in the air like a confession in church. Margaret's heart hammered. She was 67 years old, and this was the first time she'd spoken this truth out loud to another person. Rosa set down her coffee with trembling hands. When she spoke, her voice cracked with emotion. I was 17 when I first knew. There was a girl in my village, Lucia. We would meet by the river when we were supposed to be washing clothes. I loved her the way the songs talk about love, desperate, consuming, real. My mother found out. She sent me to live with my aunt in the city. 2 months later, I was engaged to Miguel. What happened to Lucia? I don't know. I never saw her again. Rosa's eyes glistened. For 54 years, I've carried her in my heart. I married, had children, built a life. But I never stopped wondering what my life could have been if the world had let me love who I loved. Margaret reached across the small space between them and took Rosa's weathered hand in hers. Neither spoke. They just sat there, 2 elderly women holding hands in the early morning light, finally being seen after a lifetime of hiding. Outside, the city woke up. But inside that small apartment, a different kind of awakening was taking place. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. Margaret's car broke down in July, leaving her stranded after a shift across town. Rosa insisted on giving her a ride. What should have been a 15-minute drive stretched into an hour as they sat in Rosa's old Toyota, parked outside Margaret's apartment building, talking. Come up for dinner, Margaret found herself saying. It's just leftovers, but there's enough. Rosa hesitated, her hand on the door handle. Are you sure? I'm sure. Margaret's apartment was small, a 1-bedroom in a building that had seen better decades. But she'd made it cozy, plants on the windowsill, photographs of her grandchildren, a bookshelf crammed with library sale finds. Rosa studied everything with quiet attention. The way you examine a person's life when you care about understanding them. They cooked together, Rosa teaching Margaret to make pupusas while Margaret showed her the proper way to season collard greens. Their hands worked side by side, occasionally brushing, each touch electric with meaning. My daughter Sophia called yesterday, Rosa said as they ate. She wanted to know if I'm seeing anyone. She says I'm lonely, that I need companionship at my age. Rosa laughed bitterly. At my age? As if 71 means I'm already dead. What did you tell her? I told her I'm fine alone. That I've been alone my whole life, even when I was married. Even when surrounded by people. Rosa looked up, her eyes fierce. But Margaret, I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of being fine. I've been fine for 7 decades. Just once before I die, I want to be happy. Margaret felt something break open in her chest. Rosa ... I know this is crazy. We're too old for this. People would say we're ridiculous, 2 old women. I don't care what people say. Margaret's voice was stronger than she'd heard it in years. I've spent my entire life caring what people say. I raised my children. I buried my husband. I've cleaned 1,000 houses and never complained. I've been good and quiet and appropriate. She reached across the table, taking both of Rosa's hands. But I want this. Whatever this is between us, I want it. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. I'm scared. Me too. Terrified. Margaret squeezed her hands. But Rosa, we don't have time to be scared anymore. We don't have time to waste. That night, Rosa didn't go home. They lay together in Margaret's small bed, fully clothed, holding hands like teenagers. They talked until dawn about dreams deferred, about children who would judge them, about bodies that ached but hearts that finally felt alive when the sun rose. Rosa kissed Margaret's cheek soft, tentative, trembling with 71 years of wanting. Is this real? Rosa whispered. Margaret pulled her closer. It's the most real thing I've ever felt. The world didn't make it easy. Margaret's middle son stopped calling after she told him about Rosa. Her daughter cried and asked if this was some kind of late-life crisis. Rosa's youngest daughter refused to visit anymore, saying she couldn't support this lifestyle. But in Rosa's apartment, the one she moved into after leaving, the house she'd shared with Miguel's memory, they built a life the world couldn't touch. They developed rhythms. Rosa woke first, making café con leche the way her grandmother had taught her. Margaret would shuffle out in her bathrobe, her gray hair wild, and Rosa would think she'd never seen anything more beautiful. They'd sit on the small balcony, watching the city wake up, Rosa's head on Margaret's shoulder. They still cleaned houses. The work didn't stop because love arrived. But now they sometimes worked together, moving through homes as a team. They made each other laugh, trading stories between rooms, stealing kisses when clients weren't looking. On Sundays, they went to the library. Two elderly women walking hand in hand, checking out books they'd read aloud to each other in the evenings. The librarian, a young woman with kind eyes, always smiled at them. Once, she slipped a note into their book stack. You two give me hope. Thank you for being visible. Rosa cried over that note. We're not trying to be visible. We're just trying to live. Maybe that's the same thing, Margaret said. There were hard days. Days when Rosa's arthritis made it impossible to work, when Margaret had to take on extra shifts to make rent for both apartments. Days when Rosa's son's continued silence felt like a physical wound. Days when Margaret looked in the mirror and saw an old woman and wondered if she was fooling herself, but then Rosa would wrap her arms around Margaret from behind while she washed dishes, resting her chin on Margaret's shoulder and whisper, I love you. I love you in a way I didn't know was possible. After all these years, I finally understand what love is supposed to feel like. And Margaret would turn in her arms. These two women with their worn bodies and weathered hearts. And they'd dance slowly in the kitchen to no music, just the sound of their breathing. Just the miracle of being held by someone who truly saw them. One evening, as they sat with a crossword puzzle they never seemed to finish, Rosa said, if I could go back and tell my 17-year-old self, that girl crying by the river, saying goodbye to Lucia, if I could tell her that she'd find love again at 71, would she believe me? Margaret thought about her own younger self, the woman who'd married David because it was expected, who'd pushed down her truth for decades. I don't know if she'd believe it, but I hope she'd hold on. I hope she'd know that her life, even with all its detours and pain, would lead her somewhere beautiful. Rosa kissed her softly. It led me to you. That's more than beautiful. That's everything. Margaret and Rosa had 3 years together before Rosa's heart, weakened by a lifetime of stress and hard labor, finally gave out. 3 years of Sunday libraries and kitchen dancing. 3 years of finally being themselves. At the funeral, Rosa's daughter Sophia approached Margaret, her eyes red. She wrote you letters, Sophia said, handing Margaret a shoebox. Every day? She wanted you to have them. The letters were love notes, gratitude, memories. And on the bottom, one final message. Margaret, thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to come home to yourself. 3 years of truth is worth 70 years of pretending. I love you. I see you. Always, Rosa. Your story doesn't end when the world says it should. Love is waiting, even if you've stopped looking. Share this story. Let someone know it's never too late to be who you really are. Share if you believe love has no expiration date. Comment below. When did you finally come home to yourself?